All we know is that we have essentially bottomed on the liquidity chart, and the direction in the future is higher. And so that's why I believe that the $80,000 dip on Bitcoin recently is the bottom. And now we're going to have a supportive liquidity situation, at least marginally, on the dollar, and we're bottom here and can go higher. Corporate securities and purchase Bitcoin in a net positive accretive manner for your stock, and therefore either you stop doing it altogether, you slow down, or you start selling Bitcoin and buying back your shares if you're trading at a discount, which again removes this impression that there's this new cohort of assets of capital that is coming into the Bitcoin space. So when we remove those two things, and then I post that, you posted my chart of the difference between the price performance of Bitcoin and the percentage change in the dollar liquidity, then Bitcoin says, okay, I'm going to react to where I should have been, absent the shimmer of these flows, and that's the move from 125,000 to 80,000.
Bitcoin reached new all-time highs between April and early October. This rise was seen as proof that institutions had finally taken root in the cryptocurrency realm. BlackRock's ETF received billions of dollars. Bitcoin treasuries were created using corporate balance sheets. Additionally, digital asset treasury firms issued financing and equity to purchase additional Bitcoin, supporting the notion that a strong long-term institutional bid had now been secured. The message was clear to the majority of ordinary investors. Smart money was fully committed, and Bitcoin's next step higher was unavoidable. But behind the surface, Arthur Hayes perceives a completely different narrative. This seeming surge of institutional belief was not what it appeared to be, according to Hayes. He contends that these flows were more motivated by short-term incentives, liquidity cycles, and structural dynamics, all of which many investors misunderstood, than by belief. If you're intrigued by bold predictions and deep financial insights, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications for more engaging content. Thank you for your support and enjoy the video.
But what we saw from sort of April 9th until October was Bitcoin hitting an all-time high. And this was driven by, I think, people misunderstanding what's going on in the ETF space, especially the IBIT ETF, the BlackRock Bitcoin ETF, the largest ETF out there that tracks Bitcoin, and the digital asset treasury company space, the DAT space, and the issuance of debt and stock to purchase Bitcoin. And these two things essentially added the impression that there's this big institutional bid for Bitcoin, and therefore the Bitcoin sort of ignored the fact that about $1 trillion was removed from the dollar liquidity markets at least from July until the present. And basically, once the ETF inflows switched to net outflows and DAT companies went from trading at premiums to trading at par, if not a slight discount, then Bitcoin basically fell down to where it should have been based on the dollar liquidity situation. People say, hey, look, Wall Street, retail, they're piling into these ETFs. And yes, that is true. But as traders and investors, we care about who is the marginal buyer and seller of a particular asset. What are the flows? And so, I have my trusty Bloomberg chart up here. You put up an HDS, the largest holders of the IBIT ETF on Bloomberg, or whatever platform you use, you'll see, and I'll name them here, Brevan Howard, Goldman Sachs, Millennium, Avenir, Jane Street are the largest 5 traders of this thing, right? There's a chart in my recent essay.
That's right.
And if you understand anything about what these businesses are, they're either multi-strat pod shops who trade hedge funds, they're global investment banks, and one of them is a family office for the founder of Huobi, Avenir. And so these entities are not places where they're just going to go long Bitcoin. Like Izzy doesn't give a fuck about Bitcoin. Alan Howard loves Bitcoin, but it's not like the key thing in his Brevan Howard asset management company where he manages clients' money. What they're in the business of doing is borrowing money and finding great ways to deploy that with high Sharpe ratios. And that would be a basis trade. So what are these guys doing? They're taking the IBIT ETF, they buy it, they pledge it with their broker, then they sell a futures contract on the CME against it, and they were making, let's call it 7 to 10% per annum on that trade. They fund at Fed funds at 4-ish%. And they lever it up, and that's a great, levered return for these type of investors. Now, as that funding rate declines, and it has declined in September and October, then these traders unwind this position by selling the ETF and buying back their futures contracts. So during the summer, we saw massive net inflows driven marginally by these large players. And then as soon as that basis fell, especially after October 10th on the massive liquidation event, then you see net outflows. And so the retail thinks, oh no, institutions love Bitcoin in the summer and now they hate it in the fall. Therefore, I need to get rid of my exposure as well, not understanding what was driving those flows in the first place. And then on the DAT space, if you have a low MNAV or even at a discount, it's very difficult to issue corporate securities and purchase Bitcoin in a net positive accretive manner for your stock. And therefore, either you stop doing it altogether, you slow down, or you start selling Bitcoin and buying back your shares if you're trading at a discount, which again removes this impression that there's this new cohort of assets or of capital that is coming into the Bitcoin space. So when we remove those two things, and then I post that, you posted my chart of the difference between the price performance of Bitcoin and the percentage change in the dollar liquidity, then Bitcoin says, okay, I'm going to react to where I should have been absent the shimmer of these flows. And that's the move from 125,000 to 80,000. But more importantly, especially for this time around, it's the cessation of quantitative tightening at the Fed. So this program that the Fed started running in 2022 of reducing their balance sheet is over. Now the balance sheet will be kept constant. And obviously most analysts believe that the Fed is going to restart quantitative easing at some point for whatever justification that they give. It doesn't really matter. All we know is that we have essentially bottomed on the liquidity chart. And the direction in the future is higher. And so that's why I believe that the $80,000 dip on Bitcoin recently is the bottom. And now we're going to have a supportive liquidity situation, at least marginally on the dollar, and we're bottom here and can go higher.
The reverse repo facility was a potent liquidity weapon available to Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen in 2023. Approximately $2.5 trillion was idle at the moment. The Treasury removed trillions of dollars from that facility and returned the money to the financial markets by issuing short-term Treasury notes with yields greater than the reverse repo rate. A significant increase in global assets was fueled by the unexpected infusion of liquidity. The circumstances had drastically changed by 2025. Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary, was no longer able to access a sizable amount of idle funds in the reverse repo. Therefore, the money had to come straight from the market when the government increased the debt ceiling and issued roughly $1 trillion in additional debt. It drained liquidity rather than added it. Almost $1 trillion in liquidity was removed from the economy between July and the present when you combine this with the Federal Reserve's continuous quantitative tightening. To remain up to date on the most recent developments in Bitcoin, cryptocurrencies, and the digital economy, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and enable post notifications.
They're always printing money. The question is how they do it. Now, we've been talking about the Federal Reserve. I also monitor the commercial banking system, and starting in November, the thing that I monitor is other deposits and liabilities and the amount of securities that the commercial banking system holds in the United States. That sort of bottomed, and we're starting to see an uptick in bank lending. And that makes sense if you read the headlines. JP Morgan's talking about $1.5 trillion of lending they're going to do to the industrial sector. The US government's talking about industrial policy where they'll guarantee a certain amount of purchasing power of rare earths, semiconductors, what have you, to inspire entrepreneurs to build things and get a bank loan to do that. So if this, industrial revolution financed by the banks, this is what Bessent and Trump campaigned on. This is what they want to do. They still haven't been able to really start actualizing that, but I think in 2026, we're going to see more evidence of that. Then we're going to see more credit creation coming from the banking system rather than the Federal Reserve. But the fact that quantitative tightening is ending is very important because at least we don't have this drag of the Fed removing something somewhere to the close of, I think, $2 or $3 trillion from the system from 2022 onwards.
What are some of the biggest lessons that you think crypto traders are still learning or still haven't learned?
I don't think people understand the amount of effort that it takes to be a leveraged trader. I think people say, I can get 100x leverage or whatever trading crypto versus I can get 2 or 3x trading stocks or some leverage ETF. This is great. I'm going to make a lot of money. But they're not willing to put in the effort to be a professional trader. By that, what I mean, 24/7 on your phone. You live and breathe these crypto markets. People think that I'm going to get off of work and trade leverage crypto for a few hours and I'm going to somehow make money. No, you're going to get liquidated. If you're just trading crypto a few hours a day, you're not reading, what is an automatic deleveraging event, how do exchanges mark your positions. And you don't understand these idiosyncratic things about the market structure that you should as a proper professional trader if you put all your effort into this. And that's where most people got wrecked in October 10th. It wasn't some conspiracy by CZ and Binance and the market makers to take away your money. It was you were lazy, you didn't read the documents that have been up for years. I mean, I invented this shit 10 years ago. We wrote about it. You should have no excuse not to know what this stuff is and how it works. And if you didn't agree with the exchange policy, you should never have been trading it. So I have no sympathy for people who lost money on October 10th, except for people who had API issues on Binance. There's no excuse. If you are a proper trader, you should not get liquidated. Period. End of story.
Yeah, ETH can go to 10K.
It absolutely can go to. It absolutely can go to 10K. I think that the Tom Lees of the world, he's spinning a great narrative for his user base, which are TradFi allocators and heavy retail traders in the Western markets. And his thesis is, okay, banks all of a sudden now want to do Web3. The most secure chain to do Web3 on is Ethereum, and therefore either they'll build their own L2 or use L2s that are out there, or use the Ethereum mainnet in and of itself. And this is going to drive usage of the chain, and that's going to be the institutional DeFi narrative. And I like that narrative. Whether or not it's true is kind of irrelevant. I think it makes sense to the people that he's selling it to, and coupled with a supportive macro environment, this will be what generates ETH to the $10,000 to $20,000 I think price by the end of the cycle. There's a pod, and a pod has a funding strategy mandate, right? These guys have equity, long, short. They have all sorts of different strategies. There's a portfolio manager, and their team will put on these types of funding trades. Could be bond RV. This is, it's a basis trade. It's a very standard trade, across all different types of ETFs that you can do. I buy the ETF and I short a future on the underlying, and I trade the difference. And this is I used to do this as a career back in the day as well. So it's a very easy trade, especially when you can fund very cheaply at Fed funds. And then essentially you double the interest rates that you receive, and you look like a hero because, again, you're just trying to make 10%. If you make 10% for Izzy, you're making $50 a year. So this is what you need to do.
Right. Yeah. So, and that funding rate goes down. Why? You said that already, but I just want to understand that.
As the price declines, then the funding rate collapses.
According to Hayes, most people greatly misunderstand what it truly takes to properly trade leverage in cryptocurrency. They believe that using 50 times or 100 times leverage is a simple way to make quick money, especially when contrasted to equities where leverage is constrained. However, leverage trading is actually a full-time job. It entails being connected to the market around the clock, comprehending all exchange regulations, how liquidations operate, how holdings are marked, what sets off automatic deleveraging, and how funding rates react to volatility. According to Hayes, it is unrealistic to think that someone could complete their work, trade leveraged cryptocurrency for a few hours, and profit steadily. Liquidation is nearly certain in the absence of complete dedication and in-depth technical expertise. Because of this, he doesn't feel much sympathy for the traders who lost everything during big moves. He didn't think market makers or exchanges were conspiring. For years, the regulations remained unaltered, public, and published. Simply put, traders didn't read them or didn't give the market enough attention. Additionally, Hayes contends that a person should never have traded on an exchange if they disagreed with its policies. According to him, a legitimate professional trader shouldn't be liquidated. Arthur Hayes' lesson is straightforward yet impactful. Markets don't reward ignorance, hope, or quick cuts. Leverage penalizes indolence. Liquidity is the only thing that makes narratives effective. You're not trading, you're gambling if you don't comprehend the workings of the system, from government cash flows to exchange mechanisms. Please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and enable post notifications for future Bitcoin, macroeconomic, and digital asset content. And as always, happy investing.